It was a quiet Saturday morning when I pulled into my driveway, 2 grocery bags in hand, still half asleep and looking forward to nothing more than a peaceful breakfast by the pool. I'd spent the last few years designing my dream backyard: clean tile work, shaded deck chairs, and a beautifully maintained rectangular pool that shimmered blue under the sun. It wasn't just a place to relax. It was a symbol. A reward after years of struggling through freelance projects, living in cramped rentals, and sacrificing personal time to climb the career ladder. That backyard was the only reason I bought a house in Lakeside Pines. The quiet, the privacy, the promise that this one piece of property was mine alone. But the moment I rounded the corner to my backyard gate, I knew something was off. I heard splashes, dozens of them, and the high-pitched screams of children having the time of their lives. For a second, I thought a neighbor's party had gotten out of hand. But then I saw it. 10, maybe 12 kids jumping in and out of my pool. Water everywhere. Beach towels scattered across my lawn furniture. Coolers open. Lawn chairs dragged out into the sun. My speaker, my personal Bluetooth speaker, was blasting pop music that I definitely hadn't cued. And there, standing like some poolside goddess in oversized sunglasses and a sun hat, was Karen Miller. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA. No one had voted for her, really, but she somehow managed to chair every committee, organize every meeting, and stamp her name on every community flyer. I didn't particularly dislike her, until that moment. She turned, saw me, smiled, and lifted a plastic cup in greeting like this was some sort of reunion. I stood frozen, the bag still dangling from my fingers. Karen walked up to me confidently, as if this entire scene was completely normal. "Hey, Marcus," she said cheerily, "we figured it was such a hot day, and the community kids needed a swim. I knew you wouldn't mind." I blinked. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I looked at the chaos again. My inflatable pool float was being used as a diving board. Someone had dumped what looked like nacho cheese on my outdoor table. There were muddy footprints everywhere. My pool, the pool I'd saved for, cleaned myself, and guarded like a jewel, was being treated like a public splash pad. Karen sipped from her cup and gave a casual shrug. "The HOA discussed using a neutral space for our weekend swim club, and your property just made the most sense. It's centrally located, already kid-safe, and honestly, it boosts neighborhood morale." I asked her point-blank, did I give permission? She waved a dismissive hand. "No, but the board agreed it was in everyone's best interest. You're such a nice guy, we knew you'd be fine with it." She smiled, the way someone does when they are not asking a question but daring you to disagree. Before I could reply, one of the kids splashed me, knocking one of the grocery bags from my hand. Eggs cracked on the sidewalk. A soda can exploded, spraying my pants. Karen barely noticed. She turned away to shout at the kids to be careful, not because they'd splashed me, but because they were getting too close to the edge of the pool without her supervision. I walked inside, stunned. My house felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I put the bags down and went to the window that overlooked the yard. More parents had arrived. They were chatting like it was a planned event. One man I'd never met was even grilling on my barbecue. I could hear them laughing, talking about how great it is that Marcus shares his pool with the community. I didn't say a word. I just watched. I opened my laptop, logged into the HOA website, and began digging. If this was sanctioned by the board, there had to be a record, minutes, a vote, something. But nothing came up. The board hadn't officially voted on pool use. There were no scheduled swim events listed. In fact, the bylaws were crystal clear. Use of private property for community events required written permission from the owner and 72 hours notice to all residents. This wasn't just inconsiderate. It was a violation. I stepped back outside and approached Karen again. She was now seated like a lifeguard on one of my Adirondack chairs, sipping sparkling water and handing out swim rings. I calmly told her this event was over, and everyone needed to leave. She raised an eyebrow, smirked, and said, "Oh Marcus, don't be that guy. You know, the neighborhood grump. These kids are making memories. This is what a real community looks like. I stood firm, insisting that I never gave permission. She narrowed her eyes and said something I'll never forget. Well, if you're going to make a scene about it, maybe you're not a good fit for this neighborhood after all. She stood, brushed imaginary dust off her shorts, and walked off. Just like that. She didn't care about permission, ownership, or respect. She believed she had the power to declare my backyard as HOA property, and worse, she believed no one would stop her. That night, I went through every inch of my yard. Trash littered the grass. Someone had spilled soda on my patio cushions. One of the pool lights was cracked. My favorite umbrella was snapped in half, and the speakers were left out in the sun, warped and swollen. The next morning, my doorbell rang. A stranger, mid-30s, fatherly, asked if the pool was still open today. When I said no, he looked disappointed and muttered, "But the flyer said Saturdays and Sundays, free family swims." Flyer? I asked him to show me. He pulled out a folded handout from his pocket, printed with Karen's name, HOA branding, and my address. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. I took the flyer and walked back inside. My phone buzzed. A neighbor texted, "Thanks for hosting the swim club again. My daughter had a blast. Hope this becomes a regular thing." It was official. Karen had spread the word that my pool was public property. Not just once, but every weekend. And everyone believed her. My anger turned to something sharper. I sat down at the table, flyer in hand, and stared out the window at the calm, empty water. The deck still had footprints. The towels still hung on the fence. But next weekend, things were going to change. If they thought they could use my space for free, they were about to learn just how expensive that mistake could be. The rest of the week was unusually quiet, but I knew better than to assume it would stay that way. Karen had established a pattern now. She didn't ask for things, she took them, dressed them up as community service, and relied on social pressure to make herself look like the neighborhood hero. I avoided interaction with the neighbors during the week, unsure who believed her and who didn't. My inbox had filled with thank you notes, emojis, and cheerful messages like "Can't wait for next weekend," and "You're the real MVP of Lakeside Pines." I deleted them all without replying. The pool stayed locked, unused, untouched, but I knew the storm would return by Saturday. What Karen hadn't expected, however, was that I'd spent every evening preparing, not just emotionally, but legally. I dug into the HOA bylaws like a lawyer prepping for trial. Section 14.2 explicitly forbade the use of private property for HOA events without consent. Section 8.7 outlined property boundary rights, and most importantly, Clause 11.3 gave homeowners the right to install surveillance equipment for the purpose of security, even facing communal areas, as long as they weren't directed at another resident's interior space. That meant I could install as many cameras as I wanted, over the gate, the yard, the entrance. And I did, all within 48 hours. On Thursday, a package arrived. A sleek security camera system with cloud storage and mobile alerts. I had it installed before sundown. Friday morning, I tested the motion alerts. They pinged my phone immediately whenever anyone came near the backyard. That same afternoon, I bought a new lock, one with a keypad entry. It was overkill, but I was done playing defense. Then I printed out my own flyer, but mine wasn't inviting. It simply read, "Private property. No public events. Unauthorized access will be considered trespassing." I laminated 3 copies and placed them on the front gate, the side fence, and the mailbox. I knew Karen would see them. I counted on it. Saturday arrived, hot and buzzing with that late summer energy. Just after 9 a.m., my motion alert chimed. I checked my phone and saw a line of SUVs parking near the curb. Children poured out, giggling and carrying towels. Some wore goggles around their necks, as if it was routine now. I stepped outside, calmly leaning on the porch rail, watching them as if I was simply observing traffic. Karen appeared 10 minutes later, in a new sun hat and bright flip-flops, clipboard in hand like she was directing a summer camp. When she saw the sign on the gate, her smile faltered. I stayed silent, just watching, not confronting, yet. She marched toward the gate and tugged the handle. It didn't budge. She tried again, more aggressively, then turned and waved at me. "Hey Marcus, could you open up? We've got more people today, so I want to start early," she called out, her voice fake friendly but with that familiar edge of assumed authority. I didn't respond. She walked up to my porch, her expression tightening with every step. "You've got some sort of new lock here. Is there a problem?" I stepped down from the porch, hands in pockets, calm but firm. "Yes," I said plainly, "the problem is this is my house, my pool, and I never agreed to host your events. I want everyone to leave." Karen's lips parted in mock surprise, as if she couldn't believe I had the nerve to challenge her. "But this is what the community wants," she said. "You're making a scene over nothing." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, highlighting the sections on property use. "Then the community can host it somewhere else. According to this, what you're doing violates 3 specific clauses. And I've got the entire last weekend recorded, including your cousin using my backyard to show off a property listing." That part hit her. She stiffened, blinking fast, caught off guard. Before she could say more, a few parents approached, asking what was taking so long. Karen turned, plastered on a smile, and told them I was just fixing the gate. Then she turned back to me and whispered, "If you make this a fight, Marcus, people will turn against you. No one likes a selfish neighbor." I raised an eyebrow and nodded slowly. "Well then," I said, "maybe it's time I stop being the neighbor they walk all over." I turned and walked back into the house. Behind me, I heard confusion spread. Parents began to ask questions. A few tried the gate themselves, grumbling that it was locked. One dad even suggested climbing the fence, but Karen stopped him, probably because she knew that would cross the legal line. A few minutes later, the crowd began to thin out. People didn't like being where they weren't welcome. Without the illusion of community approval, Karen's control started to fracture. Later that day, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, just wanted to say I support what you're doing. Karen's been overstepping for years. Let me know if you need help dealing with the HOA." It was from Leo, a quiet neighbor from 3 houses down. I'd barely spoken to him in months. Apparently, I wasn't the only one Karen had targeted. Over the weekend, more messages trickled in. Anonymous notes dropped in my mailbox. People thanking me for standing up. People warning me that Karen would escalate. And they were right. On Sunday morning, I found a printed notice on my door. Not an official HOA letterhead, just a typed note signed HOA Chairwoman, Karen Miller. It accused me of undermining community engagement and acting in bad faith with regard to collective property harmony. It was laughable, completely unenforceable, but I kept it. Everything Karen did now was fuel. Evidence. Proof. By Monday, the HOA Community Board had scheduled an emergency meeting. Karen clearly wanted to address what she was calling community obstruction. I RSVP'd with enthusiasm. But I wasn't going to just defend myself. I was going to show them every camera angle, every flyer, every text, and let her dig her own grave. I spent the rest of the week collecting records, editing video clips, compiling documents, and quietly building my case. I even created a spreadsheet of Karen's known infractions, using neighbor complaints posted anonymously on Nextdoor. The picture I was painting wasn't just of an entitled neighbor. It was of a manipulator who abused her power, twisted rules to suit herself, and acted like everyone else's property was hers to command. I didn't just want to stop her. I wanted her removed. Not just from my pool, but from the pedestal she'd built using fear, lies, and fake smiles. But even as I prepared for the meeting, I began thinking of something else. Something bigger than just saying no. Because Karen had used my pool without permission, had advertised it as her own event venue, and collected what I later discovered were donations for swim lessons that she never mentioned to anyone. And if she thought she could turn my pool into a public good without asking, then maybe it was time I turned it into something truly public. but on my terms. I closed my laptop, stood by the glass door overlooking the water, and imagined it. A ticket booth. A sign. Maybe even a small speaker system playing summer hits. If they wanted access, they were going to pay for it. And I'd make sure the entire neighborhood knew Karen didn't own anything here. Not the pool, not the people, not the narrative. I did. And the story was just getting started. Saturday morning arrived again, hot and bright, and this time I was ready. The sun had barely crested over the rooftops when I rolled out a foldable table and set it beside the newly installed keypad gate. A sign hung from the front of the table, freshly laminated and clipped neatly. Community swim experience, tickets $5, all proceeds support legal defense against HOA overreach. I wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. If Karen had turned my pool into a stage for her fake generosity, I was now taking the microphone. I had built this pool with my own money, maintained it with my own time, and watched it be misused without consent. Now, it was going to serve one purpose, showing the entire neighborhood who really had the power here. The gate had a new keypad lock with a custom code that changed every day. Only I knew the code. Cameras were recording from 3 angles, and the footage uploaded automatically to cloud storage. I had even added a QR code next to the ticket sign that linked to a copy of the HOA bylaws highlighting all the clauses Karen had broken. I wasn't just defending my home anymore, I was staging a legal, public, and hilarious pushback. By 10 a.m., the first group of people began to arrive. At first, it was only 2 families, both holding towels and chatting with excitement. They stopped abruptly when they saw the table and the new sign. One of the dads squinted at it, clearly confused. "Tickets?" he asked, almost to himself. I thought this was the HOA swim thing again. I stepped forward from the shaded chair where I'd been waiting and greeted them with a polite smile. That was last weekend. That event was unauthorized. Today, it's a private community swim, hosted by the actual owner of this pool, me. The father looked at his wife, unsure. But Karen said this was all arranged. I shrugged. Karen doesn't own this property. Never did. I've never once given permission. If you'd like to swim, it's $5 per person. Fully legal, fully safe. All profits go toward legal fees I've had to take on because of Karen's actions. Or you're free to leave. Entirely your call. They looked at each other again, then slowly turned around and walked back to their car. They didn't seem angry, just caught off guard. But they wouldn't be the last. 20 minutes later, Karen arrived. Not in her usual cheery, fake-friendly mode, this time she walked with purpose, clutching her clipboard like it was a sword. Behind her, a trail of neighborhood kids followed, along with more parents, all dressed like they were heading to a birthday party. I could tell she hadn't seen the new sign yet. That changed quickly. She approached the gate, tried to open it, and then froze. Her eyes scanned the keypad, then the sign. She didn't say anything for a second. She just turned and looked at the crowd behind her, then back at me. I stood up slowly, walked to the table, and casually picked up a clipboard of my own. "Good morning, Karen," I said. "Welcome to my pool. Would you like to buy a ticket?" The way her eyes narrowed could have cut steel. She stepped forward quickly, her voice low but sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" I handed her a paper copy of the same bylaws I had emailed to the HOA board. "Exercising my right as a homeowner. You see, you've been advertising this space as some kind of community facility. You didn't get my permission, you lied to my neighbors, and you used this pool to promote your cousin's real estate listings. I'm simply reclaiming what was always mine. Legally. And now, profitably." She hissed through her teeth. "This is harassment. You're making the neighborhood look bad." I smiled and leaned in just slightly. "If you think this is harassment, wait until you see what's trending online right now." I reached for my phone and opened a TikTok video posted by a neighbor the previous weekend. The caption read, "HOA Karen gets kicked out of her own pool." It already had over 300,000 views. The comments section was brutal. Karen's face flushed. She turned back to the crowd, clearly trying to regain control. Everyone, ignore him. This is just a misunderstanding. He'll open the gate soon. I raised my voice enough for everyone to hear. No misunderstanding here. You can swim if you pay. Or you can walk back to your cars. Either way, this pool is no longer part of Karen's fantasy HOA resort. Someone in the back started laughing. A dad near the fence chuckled and said, "Honestly, I'd pay $5 just for this show." That triggered a wave of nervous laughter. Karen tried to rally again. "You're all being manipulated. He's twisting the truth. He's trying to divide this community." But the energy had shifted. The crowd wasn't on her side anymore. One parent muttered, "I always thought it was weird that we never paid for those swim days. Who was covering the costs?" Another asked, "Wait, did he really never give permission?" Karen looked around and realized what I already knew: her grip was slipping. Her carefully crafted image as the queen of neighborhood order was unraveling. She turned to leave, her steps fast and furious, muttering something about calling the HOA board and bringing legal action. I didn't stop her. Let her escalate. Let her make more noise. Every move she made only exposed her more. The rest of the day was unexpectedly festive. A few neighbors came back, curious, and actually bought tickets. I gave them wristbands, played music, offered bottled water, and let them enjoy the pool like civilized guests. Everyone signed a simple waiver. A few asked questions about what happened, and I answered honestly, without attacking Karen, just laying out the facts. By sunset, I had made close to $200. But it wasn't about the money. It was about shifting control, taking back my space, rewriting the story. That night, I received a group email from the HOA board. An emergency meeting was being scheduled for Wednesday evening, open to all residents. The subject line read, "Clarifying use of private property for HOA events." I knew Karen had written that title herself. I replied immediately, confirming my attendance and requesting that a time slot be reserved for me to present evidence. I attached video clips, scanned flyers, screenshots of texts, and a bullet point list of violations. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about exposing how one person, hiding behind the word community, had slowly pushed that control into everyone's property, privacy, and peace of mind. As I stared out at the pool under the backyard lights, I felt the quiet again, the same quiet I had longed for weeks earlier when strangers had first invaded my space. But this time, it wasn't the calm before a storm. It was the silence of a reset. The line had been drawn. Karen had underestimated the power of quiet resistance, of calm logic, of using her own tactics against her. And come Wednesday, the board, and the entire neighborhood, was going to hear the full story, straight from me, with receipts to match. Wednesday evening arrived with the kind of humidity that made the air feel like it had weight. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 6, and by 5:30, the community hall was already filling with faces I recognized and plenty I didn't. Lakeside Pines wasn't a massive neighborhood, but it was tight-knit enough that gossip moved faster than traffic. Word about Karen's antics, my pool lockout, and the impromptu ticketed swim event had spread like wildfire, helped by the viral TikTok video that now sat at over 500,000 views. I walked into the hall carrying a laptop bag, my shoulders straight, my mind clear. I wasn't here for a fight. I was here for truth. Karen sat at the front of the room behind the folding table used by the HOA board. Her clipboard rested on the table, and she looked like she was trying to force a calm expression onto her face, though her eyes betrayed her nerves. Next to her were the 3 other board members, including Greg, who usually spent most meetings trying not to fall asleep, and Dana, who never spoke more than necessary but was sharp when she did. I took a seat in the second row, plugged in my laptop, and waited. The meeting started with the usual dry agenda items: maintenance updates, lawn care reminders, upcoming community garage sales. It was all background noise. No one in the room was there to talk about garbage pickup schedules. Everyone was waiting for the fireworks. Finally, Dana cleared her throat and said, Next on the agenda is a matter brought to our attention regarding use of private property for HOA-sanctioned events. Marcus Bennett has requested time to speak. Marcus, you have the floor. I stood and moved to the small podium. Karen didn't look at me as I passed. I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector, and within seconds, the big white wall behind me was filled with a still image of my backyard, overrun with children, parents, lawn chairs, and open coolers. I turned to the audience. "This is my home," I began, my voice steady. "This pool, this yard, this space, it belongs to me. And on 2 consecutive weekends, it was used without my knowledge, my consent, or my involvement to host community swim events organized by Karen Miller." Murmurs ran through the room. Some faces looked confused. Others looked like they were connecting the dots for the first time. I clicked to the next slide, a flyer Karen had distributed with my address listed and the phrase "Free HOA Swim Club, every weekend." "I did not agree to this," I said. "No form was submitted. No board vote was recorded. And yet, my property became the neighborhood's summer hangout because one person decided it should be." Karen finally spoke, her tone falsely calm. "Marcus, with all due respect, the board discussed using neutral spaces to improve community morale. I assumed, based on your previous friendliness, that you'd be open to it." I turned to her. "Karen, you didn't assume. You advertised it. You posted on Facebook, you passed out flyers, and you gave people the impression that I was not only aware but happy to host. That's not assumption. That's fabrication." She started to respond, but I raised my hand. "Please, let me finish. I have evidence." I clicked through several slides, camera footage showing the events, timestamps, audio recordings of Karen telling guests that I had volunteered the space, and then finally, the text of the HOA bylaws highlighting exactly how many rules had been broken. The room had gone still. Karen looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, lips pressed tightly together. Then I brought out the kicker. "There's something else," I said, switching to a new slide. It showed Venmo screenshots and messages I'd been forwarded anonymously from a concerned parent. Karen wasn't just organizing these events. She was also collecting donations from parents for swim lessons, snacks, and cleanup fees. Payments made directly to her. None of it reported to the HOA. None of it disclosed. My pool was being used to generate income, for someone else. Without my knowledge. The silence was thick now. People looked at Karen, then at each other, then back at me. The expressions varied: shock, discomfort, even anger. Dana leaned toward her microphone. "Karen, is this true?" Karen's voice cracked slightly when she answered. "Those were voluntary contributions. And they were used for supplies, for the children. This wasn't for profit." Dana didn't even blink. "Did you report those contributions to the board as required by HOA Policy 3.9? Karen didn't answer. Greg, the normally sleepy board member, actually leaned forward and looked straight at Karen. "You told us Marcus had offered the pool. That it was all arranged. You never said anything about payments." Karen's calm veneer began to fracture. "I was doing what was best for the community," she snapped. "If he wanted to object, he should have said so before. But no, he wanted attention. That's why he sold tickets. That's why he turned this into a circus." I stepped back up to the microphone. "I sold tickets because I was tired of being taken advantage of. Because I wanted to make a point, that no one has the right to use another person's property just because they think they can. And unlike you, I didn't pocket the money. I've documented every cent and donated the entire amount to the local legal aid clinic, which helps homeowners fight unjust HOA rulings." Applause broke out, not from everyone, but enough to make Karen sink a little deeper into her chair. Dana cleared her throat again. "Thank you, Marcus. The board will discuss this matter further. But from what we've seen tonight, it's clear that several serious missteps occurred under the assumption of authority not granted by our charter. A vote will be held after this meeting to determine Karen Miller's continued role as board chair." Karen stood up abruptly. You can't do this. I've worked too hard for this community. You're going to let one disgruntled homeowner destroy everything we've built. Dana didn't flinch. No, Karen. You did that yourself. Karen stormed out of the room, her heels echoing sharply against the tile floor. The doors closed behind her, but the room stayed quiet. I turned off the projector and packed my things. A few neighbors came up to me afterward, some apologetic, some sheepish, a few even offering to help with pool maintenance or support future community events, properly done. I thanked them, but didn't make promises. Trust wasn't something I gave easily anymore. When I got home, I sat beside the pool under the soft glow of the garden lights. For the first time in weeks, it felt like my space again. The water was still, untouched, just the way I liked it. I knew the fallout from tonight wasn't over. Karen might retaliate. There might be whispers, attempts to rewrite the narrative. But none of it mattered. Because tonight, the neighborhood had seen her truth, and mine. And in that quiet moment, under the fading light, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The power she had stolen was never really hers. It was mine all along. A week passed since the meeting, and the air around Lakeside Pines was different, tense, as if everyone had just witnessed a big change but wasn't quite sure how it was going to play out. Word had spread that Karen Miller had been removed as chairwoman of the HOA board, and while the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip, I stayed quiet. I didn't need to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. In the aftermath of the meeting, the board had decided to launch a full review of HOA practices. Karen's financial mismanagement, the unauthorized use of my pool, and her attempts to cover it all up had opened a can of worms that she couldn't contain. The fallout was swift. Neighbors who had once been passive now had questions, complaints, and demands. Karen's influence, which had felt so absolute just a few weeks ago, was crumbling before her eyes. I didn't attend the next HOA meeting. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had already turned against her, and I didn't have to lift a finger. My neighbors, who had been passive bystanders, now saw Karen for who she truly was, someone who abused her position, manipulated others, and trampled over people to get what she wanted. The board voted her out entirely, removing her from the chair and suspending her from all future involvement with the HOA. To add insult to injury, the community rallied behind the idea of reforming the HOA to prevent future power grabs. It was clear that Karen's reign had left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. I'd thought that once Karen was out, things would settle, that the dust would finally settle around my pool, but the reality was a little different. What had started as my personal stand against one entitled neighbor had grown into something much bigger. Neighbors were suddenly more engaged, more vocal, and not just about the HOA's governance. Everyone had their own horror stories, hidden fines, unjustified penalties, and petty disputes that had simmered under the surface for far too long. And now, with Karen's influence gone, people were ready to speak up. I found myself in the middle of a community-wide movement, not something I ever expected. People started knocking on my door, coming to my backyard, not just to swim, but to talk. By the following weekend, the pool was buzzing with activity again. But this time, it wasn't kids playing in the water, it was the adults, the ones who had quietly fumed under Karen's rule, the ones who had seen their property values manipulated, their voices ignored, and their concerns dismissed. They were ready to take back control, to stop being pawns in someone else's game. And for the first time in ages, the conversations around the pool weren't about gossip, but about change. About how we could build a better neighborhood, one where everyone had a say, where there were no hidden agendas, no secrets. As I stood by the pool, listening to the discussions, I realized something important. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. It wasn't just about Karen's overreach. It was about community. Real community. The kind where people respected each other's space, where people didn't take what wasn't theirs, and where people were willing to fight for each other. It was about neighbors becoming active participants in the spaces they lived in, making sure they were not just passive recipients of whatever the HOA dictated. And I had helped make that happen. Maybe not intentionally at first, but I had sparked it, and I couldn't deny that a sense of pride welled up in me. By the end of the week, things had moved forward. The board restructured itself, implementing stronger rules for transparency and accountability. Meetings were now open to the public, and members of the community could voice concerns, ask questions, and vote on decisions. There was talk of starting a neighborhood watch program, organizing community gardens, and even planning regular block parties where everyone could get together without the looming presence of Karen and her controlling ways. I had become an unlikely symbol of resistance, but now I found myself welcoming the responsibility. It felt good to be part of something that wasn't just about my own backyard but about the entire community's well-being. Still, there were moments when I'd catch myself smiling at the memories of how it all started. A few months ago, I had been a guy sitting in his backyard, thinking he was safe in his own space, only to be blindsided by Karen's schemes. Now, I was standing at the forefront of a community that had found its voice. I'd fought back, sure, but I wasn't alone anymore. The entire neighborhood had become part of the fight, and it felt good. Really good. But there was something else that had changed too. Karen, who had once dominated every conversation, every gathering, had vanished from public view. She was still technically a resident, but she had become a pariah, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. I hadn't heard from her since the meeting, and for a while, I wondered if she'd leave, move somewhere else, or even try to salvage her life in some way. But that didn't happen. Instead, she became a ghost in the neighborhood, a name people mentioned in hushed tones, a cautionary tale that would be told for years to come. People didn't just avoid her, they actively shut her out. It was as if they had collectively decided they were done with her. And in a way, that was justice enough. I never did reopen the pool to the HOA. Instead, I kept it as a private retreat, a space where I could sit back and enjoy the fruits of what had become a new chapter in Lakeside Pines. It wasn't about holding on to control anymore, it was about creating a space where everyone had a voice, where no one was trampled under the weight of someone else's ambitions. And it was clear now that my role in that transformation had been pivotal. It had all started with a locked gate, a handful of tickets, and a simple decision to stand up for what was right. That decision had sparked something bigger than I could have imagined, a real change in the way the neighborhood operated. As I sat by the pool that evening, watching the sunset and listening to the gentle hum of conversation, I realized something important. The fight wasn't just about Karen's power, it was about all of us finding our power. And I had found mine, along with a community that had found theirs too.